The man from the Architectural Control Committee didn't meet his eyes. He just kept photographing the truck, his expression as flat and gray as the clipboard in his hand. The click and flash of the digital camera felt alien in the familiar sanctuary of Tim Miller's driveway, a space that smelled of motor oil, warm asphalt, and the faint, sweet scent of the rose bushes his wife, Deborah, meticulously tended. "Good afternoon," Tim said, wiping a smear of grease from his forearm with an already stained rag. He'd been halfway through replacing the fuel filter on Betty, his 1999 Ford F-150. Her gloss black paint, chipped and honest, absorbed the afternoon sun. "Can I help you with something?" The man, whose polo shirt bore the embroidered logo of Prestige Community Management, lowered his camera. He had the blandly pleasant face of someone paid to deliver inconvenient news. Timothy Miller, 14 to 22, Arbor Lane. "That's me. Just documenting a potential covenant violation for the HOA Board of Directors," the man said, his tone a perfect blend of apology and bureaucracy. He made a neat checkmark on a form. "Have a good day." He turned and walked back to his Prius parked at the curb, the epitome of quiet, suburban efficiency. He didn't offer a violation number, a specific complaint, or a name. He was a ghost, a data gatherer, the first whisper of a coming storm. Tim stood there, wrench in hand, a cold weight settling behind his sternum. He knew, with a certainty that had nothing to do with logic and everything to do with instinct, that this was Karen Spruce's handiwork. He finished his work on Betty, his movements methodical and precise, the familiar choreography of bolts and gaskets, a temporary balm for his unease. He cleaned his tools, wiped them down, and placed them back in their designated spots in the chest against the garage wall. Control. That's what this was about. He could control an engine, diagnose a misfire, set the timing to a perfect, rhythmic hum. But the intricate, often irrational machinery of a homeowners association was a different beast entirely. Inside, the house was an island of calm. Deborah was at the kitchen table, her laptop open, surrounded by spreadsheets that charted the invisible flow of global logistics for a shipping conglomerate. She had been a signals analyst in the Navy, same as Tim had been a mechanic. She saw the world in patterns, in data streams, in the subtle signals that preceded the noise. She looked up as he came in, her brow furrowed in concentration, a look he knew well. It was the same look she'd had when tracking ghost signals in the Persian Gulf. "What's wrong?" she asked, her focus shifting entirely to him. She could read him better than any satellite transmission. "We had a visitor," he said, grabbing a bottle of water from the fridge. "ACC, taking pictures of Betty." Deborah leaned back in her chair, her fingers tapping a slow rhythm on the table. "Karen." It wasn't a question. "It has to be." Tim agreed. Ever since she got elected board president last spring, it's been one thing after another. The friendly reminder about bringing the trash cans in 2 hours late. The email about the aesthetic harmony of lawn ornaments. "She wants the truck gone," Deborah stated. "She told you as much at the block party." He remembered the conversation vividly. Karen, holding a glass of white wine, her smile stretched thin, had called Betty an anachronism and an eyesore. She'd suggested, with the practiced charm of a real estate agent closing a deal, that a newer, less industrial vehicle would better protect the neighborhood's property values. Her property values, specifically, as her house was 2 doors down and had a direct line of sight to his driveway. "It's not just about the truck," Tim said, sitting down across from her. "It's a power play. She's testing the fences, seeing what she can get away with." "Then we check our own fences," Deborah said, her voice shifting into its familiar, analytical mode. She stood up and walked to the small office off the living room. returning a moment later with a thick, three-ring binder. Their closing documents. It was organized with the precision only she could muster. Tabs neatly labeled deed, title insurance, survey, and the thickest section of all, CC&Rs. She opened it to the covenants, conditions, and restrictions. The quasi-legal Bible that governed their lives in the pristine enclave of Chestnut Ridge. For the next hour. They didn't talk. They read. They passed pages back and forth, highlighting sections, making notes. Tim, with his mechanic's mind for systems and rules. And Deborah, with her analyst's eye for loopholes and language. "Here it is," Tim said, pointing to a paragraph. He read it aloud. CC&R Section 8.4.2, Parking and Vehicles. No junk, derelict, or inoperable vehicles shall be permitted on any lot. For purposes of this section, a junk vehicle shall be defined as any vehicle which is not licensed and registered, or which is in a state of visible disrepair. All vehicles regularly parked on a lot must be in operable condition. Parking is restricted to designated driveways and garages. No vehicle shall be parked on common area property, including streets and landscaped cul-de-sacs, for a period exceeding 24 hours. Betty is operable, licensed, and registered, Deborah murmured, reading over his shoulder. She's not in disrepair. She's a classic. And she's parked on our driveway, which is part of our private lot. Keep reading, Tim said. There's a subsection. She found it. Figure 8.4.2b, Commercial Vehicles and Equipment. No commercial vehicles, trailers, boats, or recreational vehicles shall be regularly parked on any lot in a location that is visible from the street or any adjacent lot. Betty's a private-use pickup truck, not a commercial vehicle. Tim said, "We're clean on all counts." Deborah was silent for a long moment, her eyes scanning the page. The language is specific. Tim, it lists what's prohibited, but it's the unspoken part she'll use. It doesn't explicitly grant us the right to park any vehicle we want, as long as it's not on the prohibited list. It creates a gray area, and Karen lives in the gray areas. He knew she was right. This wasn't about the letter of the law. It was about the interpretation. And, as board president, Karen Spruce was the chief interpreter. "So, what's the next move?" he asked. "The next move is hers," Deborah said, closing the binder with a soft thud. The ACC inspector was Step 1 documentation. Step 2 will be a formal notice. It'll come in the mail. They have to follow a process. Our job is to know the process better than they do. She stood and began to make dinner. The domestic ritual, a comforting counterpoint to the legalistic chill that had settled in the room. Tim watched her, his partner, his strategist. They had faced down bigger threats than a suburban tyrant in a sensible pantsuit. But this felt different. This was an attack on their home, on their right to live their lives peacefully. It was an attempt to legislate taste, to enforce a bland, uniform vision of suburban perfection. He looked out the window at Betty. The setting sun caught her chrome bumper, making it gleam. She wasn't an eyesore. She was a piece of his history, a testament to thousands of hours of patient work. Her engine, which he'd rebuilt himself, was a symphony of controlled combustion. Her worn driver's seat was a map of his life. She was honest. She was reliable. She was his. And he wasn't going to let Karen Spruce take that away from him without a fight. The first shot had been fired, and Team Miller was already preparing the defense. The official declaration of war arrived 6 days later. It didn't come as a simple letter. It came with the bureaucratic solemnity of a certified mailing, announced by a pale green slip left in their mailbox by the postal carrier. Tim had to drive to the post office and present his ID to a clerk, who retrieved a crisp, white business envelope from a locked drawer and had him sign a form to receive it. The formality of the act was designed to intimidate, to signal that this was no longer a neighborly disagreement. Back in his truck, he slit the envelope open with a thumbnail. The letterhead was from Prestige Community Management. The text was cold, impersonal, and bristling with legal jargon. Formal notice of violation date. Date. Tracking number 7218 3090 002 11421 8854. Property 1422 Arbor Lane. Owner Timothy and Deborah Miller. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Miller, this letter serves as formal notice that your property is in violation of the covenants, conditions, and restrictions, CC&Rs, of the Chestnut Ridge Homeowners Association. An inspection conducted on date by an agent of the Architectural Control Committee ACC has documented the following violation. Violation, CC&R, Rule 8.4.2, Parking and Vehicles. Description: A. 1999 Ford F-150 truck, black in color, is parked in the driveway. The presence of this vehicle is considered to detract from the uniform aesthetic harmony of the community as envisioned by the governing documents. Required action: the vehicle must be removed from public view. It may be stored in your garage or at an off-site facility. Cure period: you have 14 days from the date of this letter to rectify this violation. Failure to cure the violation within the specified timeframe will result in a formal hearing before the Board of Directors, at which fines may be levied in the amount of $100 or dollars per day. Retroactive to the end of the cure period. Continued non-compliance may result in further sanctions, up to and including the placement of a lien against your property. Sincerely, Prestige Community Management, on behalf of the Chestnut Ridge HOA Board of Directors. Tim read the letter 3 times. The words aesthetic harmony leaped off the page. It was a subjective, unquantifiable phrase, a weapon of pure opinion dressed up as a rule. They hadn't even bothered to cite a specific clause proving the truck was a junk vehicle or commercial equipment, because they knew they couldn't. They were simply declaring it ugly by decree. The clock had started. 14 days. He drove home, the letter a cold weight on the passenger seat. This was it. The inciting incident. The formal challenge. That evening, he and Deborah sat at the kitchen table, the letter centered between them like a piece of explosive ordnance. She's not even trying to hide it, Deborah said, her voice tight with controlled anger. She knows it's a weak claim, so she's banking on the threat of fines and a lien to scare us into compliance. It's a bluff, Tim said. She's betting we'll fold rather than call. It's a calculated risk on her part, Deborah corrected him. She knows most people are conflict averse. They'll move the truck, pay a small fine, and grumble about it. They won't hire a lawyer. They won't spend weeks fighting City Hall. Or in this case, the HOA. She's betting on our apathy. She bet wrong. Deborah nodded, her analytical mind already charting a course. Okay, first obstacle is the management company. They're the gatekeepers. Tomorrow, you will call Brenda at Prestige. You will be polite, reasonable, and firm. You will state that you have received the letter and believe it to be in error. You will respectfully request the specific, objective criteria under which a 20-year-old, well-maintained private truck constitutes a violation of aesthetic harmony. You will ask for the minutes from the board meeting where this specific interpretation of FERBR 8.4.2 was adopted. Don't argue. Just ask for the documentation. We need to create a paper trail of our attempts to resolve this amicably. The next morning, Tim made the call. Brenda, the portfolio manager for Chestnut Ridge, was a symphony of practiced empathy and bureaucratic deflection. "Oh, Mr. Miller, thank you for calling," she began, her voice smooth and professional. "I understand your concern. Tim calmly laid out his points. Just as Deborah had coached him, he referenced the CCNR section, noted his vehicle was in compliance with every specific prohibition, and asked for the documented standard for aesthetic harmony. There was a pause. The faint click of a keyboard in the background. "Well," Brenda said, her tone shifting slightly. "The board has a certain amount of discretionary authority in interpreting the covenants to protect the overall character of the community." "I understand," Tim said politely, "but that discretion must be based on established rules, not personal preference. Could you please forward me the board resolution that defines the aesthetic standard for vehicles, and the minutes where that was discussed and voted upon?" Another pause. Longer this time. "I'm afraid I'll have to consult with the board president on that request," Brenda said, her voice now a shade cooler. "Karen, Mrs. Spruce handles all covenant interpretation matters directly." "Of course," Tim said. "Please have her call me. Or, if it's easier, just email me the documents." "I will pass along your message, Mr. Miller." The call ended. The message was clear. Brenda was a wall, and the only door in that wall was controlled by Karen. This wasn't a routine violation being processed by a neutral third party. This was a personal attack, orchestrated by the board president and executed through her compliant management agent. The system he had hoped to use for a reasonable appeal was already compromised. He relayed the conversation to Deborah that evening. "Stonewalled. Just as we expected," she said, updating a document on her laptop she had titled HOA Correspondence Log. "She's isolating us, forcing us to deal only with her. This confirms it's not about the rules. It's about her." The first obstacle hadn't been overcome, but it had been clearly identified. They weren't fighting the HOA. They were fighting Karen Spruce, and she had turned the entire administrative apparatus of their community into her personal weapon. "So what now?" Tim asked. Deborah's fingers flew across the keyboard. "Now, the investigation begins. She controls the management company and the board, but she doesn't control the public record." She turned the laptop to face him. On the screen was the homepage for the county recorder's office. "Tomorrow, you're going to take a little trip downtown. We need official copies of two things: the master plat map for the Chestnut Ridge development, and a full copy of our property deed, including any and all easements and attachments. We're going to find out exactly where our property line is, down to the inch, and we're going to find out if there's anything else attached to our land that she could possibly be twisting to her advantage." The battle lines were drawn. Karen had the power of the office, the threat of fines, and a bureaucracy at her command. Tim and Deborah had a binder, a laptop, and a quiet, unshakable resolve to fight for their home with the most powerful weapon of all: the facts. The county recorder's office was a temple of bureaucratic antiquity, housed in the basement of the county courthouse. It smelled of old paper, dust, and the faint, metallic tang of microfilm. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sterile glow on rows of metal shelves groaning under the weight of massive, leather-bound plat books. Tim felt a strange sense of reverence in the quiet, cavernous room. This was the bedrock of ownership, the raw data of property itself. Every parcel of land in the county was documented here, its boundaries delineated, its history recorded on brittle paper and spools of film. He gave his parcel number to a clerk, who looked as though she'd been there since the books were new. She directed him to a specific volume and a microfilm reader in the corner. The rising action of their small drama was about to begin. Not with a confrontation, but with quiet, meticulous research. First, he pulled the plat book. He found the page for the Chestnut Ridge development and ran his finger down the columns until he found his lot. The plat map was a masterpiece of precision, drawn by a licensed surveyor. It was a web of crisp black lines, curves, and numbers, denoting every property line, every utility easement, every inch of common area. He located his lot, 14 to 22 Arbor Lane. The lines were unequivocal. His property extended a full 20 feet from the front of his house to the sidewalk, encompassing the entire driveway and the small patch of grass on either side. Betty was parked squarely, undeniably, on his private property. A small knot of tension in his chest loosened. That was one argument Karen couldn't win. Next, he threaded the microfilm for his deed into the reader. The machine whirred to life, projecting a grainy, black-and-white image of the document onto the screen. He scrolled through the dense legalese, the history of his small patch of suburbia. He saw the name of the original developer, the transfer to the first owner, and finally, the transfer to him and Deborah. It was all standard. But then, he saw it. At the end of the main deed, there was an attachment, a separate document that had been filed with the original plat in 1987. It was titled, Declaration of Easements and View Corridors. His heart rate quickened. This was the something else Deborah had predicted. The document was written in the flowery, slightly ambiguous language of older legal drafting. It established several easements for utilities, which was normal. But then, there was a section that made him lean closer to the screen. Furthermore, for the purpose of preserving the aesthetic quality and scenic vista of the Chestnut Ridge community, a perpetual view corridor easement is hereby established upon the first 10 feet of the frontal plane of all lots adjacent to common area parks and thoroughfares. No structure, planting, or vehicle of a temporary or permanent nature which materially obstructs said view corridor shall be permitted. Tim read the paragraph again and again. A cold dread washed over him. This was it. This was Karen's weapon. His house was on a corner lot, adjacent to the small, landscaped greenbelt that ran along the main boulevard into their subdivision. His driveway fell within that frontal plane, and the easement was old, vague, and terrifyingly powerful. The mystery had shifted. It was no longer, where is the property line? It was now, what the hell is a view corridor? And why is it suddenly being enforced after 30 years? He paid for photocopies of the plat map and the full deed, including the easement declaration. The large, crackling paper of the map felt solid and reassuring, with its surveyor's clear lines. In contrast, the copy of the easement deed felt insidious, its flowery language a trap laid decades ago. Meanwhile, Deborah was waging her own war on the bureaucratic front, citing a state statute that guaranteed homeowners access to association records. She had sent a formal, written request to Prestige Management for unredacted copies of all board meeting minutes for the past 3 years. Their initial response was to send the same file they had sent before, with large sections blacked out. The redactions were clustered around meetings from 2 years ago, long before Karen was president. Deborah, citing the statute again, sent a second letter, this one copied to the HOA's registered attorney, stating that their failure to provide the full records was a violation of state law and that further refusal would result in a formal complaint to the state attorney general's office. The threat worked. A week later, a large manila envelope arrived. Inside were the unredacted minutes. That evening, they spread the documents across the kitchen table, the stark, clear plat map, the ambiguous, threatening easement deed, and the stack of meeting minutes. Deborah's eyes, trained to find the signal in the noise, scanned the pages. Here, she said, her voice quiet. She pointed to a section from a meeting dated 2 years and 3 months prior. The minutes recorded a discussion item raised by a homeowner. That homeowner was Karen Spruce. At the time, just a resident, not a board member. She had lodged a complaint against her next-door neighbor on the other side, not Tim, for parking a small pop-up camper in their driveway. She had cited the very same view corridor easement clause. The entry read, "Homeowner Karen Spruce presented a complaint regarding a recreational vehicle parked at 1418 Arbor Lane, citing the view corridor easement from the original development plan. After discussion and consultation with the HOA's legal counsel at the time, the board president Adams, Secretary Chin, Treasurer Davis voted unanimously that the easement language was overly broad and likely unenforceable as it pertains to vehicles on private driveways. Council advised that selective enforcement after decades of non-enforcement would expose the HOA to legal risk. Motion to dismiss the complaint and take no action passed 3-0. Tim stared at the page, a slow burning anger rising in his chest. She knew. He whispered. She knew the board had already ruled on this. She knew they had been told by a lawyer that it was unenforceable. That's what was redacted. She was trying to hide a past precedent that went against her. She's not just misinterpreting the rules, Deborah said, looking up at him, her face grim. She's actively ignoring a formal board decision and legal advice. This isn't a simple disagreement anymore. This is a willful abuse of power. The midpoint twist was more profound than they could have imagined. They had found the loophole Karen was exploiting, but they had also found the proof that she knew it was a loophole she had no right to use. Their fight was no longer just about defending their property. It was about exposing a lie. The knowledge was empowering, but it was also chilling. Karen wasn't just a petty tyrant. She was deliberately acting against the known legal counsel of the association she now led. She was putting the entire community at legal and financial risk to settle a personal score over a truck. Their small investigation had uncovered the heart of the matter. Now, they had to figure out how to present it. Their timeline was shrinking. The 14-day cure period had expired. The next letter from Prestige Management was surely on its way. The second certified letter arrived like a death notice. This time, Tim didn't even need to go to the post office. The mail carrier recognized him in the yard and handed him the envelope and the digital scanner to sign. The formality felt less intimidating now, more like the predictable move of a cornered opponent. Notice of hearing. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Miller, as you have failed to cure the violation detailed in our letter, dated date, tracking number 7218 3090 02 14221 8854, you are hereby summoned to a formal hearing before the Chestnut Ridge HOA Board of Directors. Date 2 weeks out. Time 7:00 p.m. Location Chestnut Ridge Community Center. Meeting Room B. The purpose of this hearing is to officially levy fines for the ongoing violation of CC&R for 8.4.2. The proposed fine is $100.0 per day, retroactive to the end of the cure period. You will have an opportunity to present your case to the board. Your presentation will be limited to 3 minutes. Please be advised that unpaid fines constitute a debt to the association and may result in the placement of a lien on your property, as permitted by the CC&Rs and state statutes. The words hit with the force of a physical blow. $100 a day. By the time of the hearing, the total would already be over $1,000 and climbing. The threat of the lien was no longer a distant possibility. It was an explicit, looming menace that could jeopardize their mortgage, their credit, their home itself. This notice was the second major obstacle, a wall of financial and legal pressure designed to make them break. The effect on the neighborhood was subtle, but immediate. The friendly waves from across the street became hesitant. then stopped altogether. Conversations at the mailbox grew clipped and hurried. People who used to stop and chat when walking their dogs now found the pavement on the other side of the street fascinating. Tim and Deborah were being quietly, politely, isolated. No one wanted to be seen taking sides, which, in a conflict like this, was the same as taking the side of the person in power. One evening, Tim was out trimming the hedges when his next-door neighbor, Tommy, wandered over, a half-empty glass of iced tea in his hand. Tommy was a good-natured software engineer, a man who generally tried to find the humor in any situation, but he wasn't smiling tonight. "Hey, Tim," he said, his voice low. "Heard you got a hearing notice." Word traveled fast in Chestnut Ridge. "News travels faster than light around here," Tim said with a wry smile. Tommy took a sip of his tea, avoiding Tim's eyes. "Listen, man, I just wanted to, you know." He trailed off, looking uncomfortable. "This whole thing is nuts. It's a truck. A nice truck. By the way." "Thanks, Tommy." "It's just Karen." Tommy sighed, finally looking at Tim. "She's on a tear. After she got elected, she did a full property review. Sent me a courtesy notice about my fence." He gestured to the perfectly normal-looking wooden fence separating their properties. "Said it's 6 inches too high according to the original ACC guidelines from 1987. 6 inches. "Did you get a formal violation?" Tim asked. Tommy shook his head. "No. And that's the thing. I talked to her, said I'd look into it, and she just let it drop. Said she appreciated my cooperative attitude. She's got this little black book of minor, technically on the books violations for half the houses on this street. My fence, the Martins' basketball hoop, the Wilsons' off-color mailbox. She ignores them as long as you stay on her good side. But if you cross her..." The implication was clear. Karen wasn't enforcing the rules. She was weaponizing them. She was practicing selective enforcement, a tactic that was not only unfair, but often legally indefensible for an HOA. Tommy looked pained, and Tim understood why. He was offering a warning, but he was also admitting he couldn't offer support. His own minor, unpunished violation made him vulnerable. "I get it, Tommy. Don't worry," Tim said, clapping him on the shoulder. "This is my fight." But as Tommy walked back to his own yard, his words hung in the air, presenting Tim with a profound moral dilemma. He and Deborah had the evidence to prove Karen was a hypocrite who selectively enforced the rules. He could, at that hearing, point out Tommy's fence, the Martins' hoop, the Wilsons' mailbox. He could expose her pattern of favoritism and intimidation. He could win by burning the whole village down, turning neighbor against neighbor, and making everyone vulnerable to her retaliation. Or he could find another way, a way to win that was precise and surgical, targeting only Karen's specific actions against him, protecting his neighbors from the fallout. He went inside and told Deborah about the conversation. "He's right," she said, her expression thoughtful. "If we make this about her selective enforcement, she'll retaliate against everyone to prove she's being fair. Fines for Tommy. Fines for the Martins. It would be chaos. Our victory would cost our neighbors." "So we can't use it," Tim said, the weight of the decision settling on him. It was a powerful piece of evidence they would have to leave on the table. "No," Deborah said, her voice firm. "We don't need to. Our case is stronger if we take the high road. It's not about her character or her hypocrisy. It's about the facts of our specific case, the plat map, the easement, the unredacted minutes. It's clean. It's irrefutable." She looked at him, her eyes clear and determined. We win by being better than her. We win with the truth, not with mud. The path forward was now clear. If narrow, they would not be drawn into a wider war. They would focus their attack with the precision of a laser, aimed at one specific target. The lie Karen Spruce was trying to turn into a $1,000 fine and a lien against their home. The hearing was in 10 days. The countdown had begun. The Chestnut Ridge Community Center Meeting Room B was designed to suck the life out of any gathering. The walls were a depressing shade of beige. The carpet was a vaguely patterned gray, and the air hummed with the monotonous drone of an overworked HVAC unit. A large, institutional clock with a sweeping second hand hung on the far wall, a stark reminder that time was a finite resource. 30 or so homeowners were scattered among the plastic chairs, their expressions ranging from bored to curious to vaguely hostile. Tim and Deborah took seats in the front row. Tommy gave them a subtle, encouraging nod from across the aisle. At the front of the room, behind a long folding table, sat the board of directors. Karen Spruce was in the center, flanked by the other two members: Martin, a perpetually nervous accountant, and Sylvia, a retired schoolteacher who seemed to be perpetually intimidated by Karen. A representative from Prestige Management, Brenda, sat at the end of the table, her laptop open, ready to take minutes. Karen called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of a gavel. She moved through the initial agenda items: landscaping bids, pool maintenance schedules with brisk, intimidating efficiency. She was an expert at wielding Robert's Rules of Order, cutting off rambling questions and tabling inconvenient discussions. This was her throne room, and she was the undisputed queen. Finally, she arrived at their case. "The next item on the agenda," she announced, her voice devoid of emotion, "is the violation hearing for 1422 Arbor Lane." She looked directly at Tim. "Mr. and Mrs. Miller, this is your opportunity to address the board regarding the ongoing violation of CC&R Section 8.4.2, as per our bylaws. You have 3 minutes to present your case. Brenda, please time them." Brenda nodded, her eyes on her laptop's timer. The big clock on the wall read 7:32. The second hand swept upward. The climax of their 6-week ordeal had begun. Tim stood up, holding a slim laptop and a small projector. Deborah remained seated, her expression calm and supportive. He placed the projector on the table and aimed it at the blank beige wall behind Karen. He didn't raise his voice. He spoke in the calm, measured tone of a man presenting a technical briefing. "Good evening, members of the board and neighbors," he began. "My name is Tim Miller. My wife Deborah and I are here tonight to respectfully dispute the violation notice we received. We believe it was issued in error, and we have the official county records to prove it." He clicked a button on his laptop. The projector whirred to life, displaying a high-resolution image of the official county plat map on the wall. He used a laser pointer to trace the lines of his property. Minute 1. The violation notice cites CC&R Section 8.4.2 and concerns my truck, which is parked in my driveway. The first and most important document to consider is the official plat map for our development, on file at the county recorder's office. As you can see, the surveyed property lines for Lot 1422 clearly show that our private property extends from the house to the public sidewalk. My truck is parked entirely on our private lot and is therefore not in violation of any rules regarding parking in common areas. He paused, letting the stark, undeniable lines of the map sink in. A low murmur went through the room. Karen, looking irritated, leaned into her microphone. "Mr. Miller, the board is aware of the property lines. The violation is not about parking in a common area. It is about the view corridor easement, which you were made aware of." Minute 2. Thank you for bringing that up. Mrs. Spruce, Tim said, his tone still perfectly even. He clicked to the next slide. It showed the flowery, ambiguous text of the easement deed. You are correct. There is an old easement deed attached to the original plat. However, an easement is not an ownership right, and its enforcement must be reasonable and consistent. He clicked again. A new document appeared on the wall, bright and clear. It was the unredacted minutes from the board meeting 2 years prior. He used the laser pointer to highlight the key section. More importantly, Tim continued, his voice resonating with newfound strength. This is not the first time this specific easement has been brought before the board. As you can see from the official, unredacted minutes of the meeting held on May 12th, 2 years ago, this exact issue was raised by you, Mrs. Spruce, regarding another property. At that time, the board, after consulting with legal counsel, voted unanimously that the easement language was, and I quote, overly broad and likely unenforceable as it pertains to vehicles on private driveways. The board voted 3-0 to take no action. This established a formal precedent. The murmur in the room grew louder. People were turning in their chairs, looking at Karen, whose face had gone rigid. Martin, the accountant, was visibly sweating. Tim had just proven that the president of the HOA was pursuing a violation that she personally knew the association's own lawyer had advised against. Minute 3. My purpose here tonight is not to question the board's judgment on other properties, but simply to present the facts regarding my own, Tim said, deliberately taking the high road and protecting Tommy and his other neighbors. The facts are simple. My truck is on my private property, as confirmed by the county plat map. The easement you're attempting to use for enforcement was previously deemed unenforceable by this very HOA's legal counsel and a prior board. To continue to pursue this violation, to spend our community's funds on management company time and potential legal fees to enforce something you know is invalid, is a breach of the board's fiduciary duty to this community. He looked at the clock on the wall. He had 10 seconds left. We respectfully ask that you follow the precedent you yourselves established. We ask you to dismiss this violation and rescind all associated fines. Thank you for your time. He turned off the projector and sat down. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the hum of the HVAC. He had not yelled. He had not accused. He had simply laid out an undeniable, documented sequence of facts. He had used Karen's own system, her own records, against her. Karen sat frozen for a moment, her face a mask of cold fury. She was trapped. Her 2 fellow board members were staring at the projection on the wall, then at her, their expressions a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. They had been led into a legal minefield without being told it was already mapped. The board will take this under advisement. Karen finally choked out. But it was too late. Before she could move on, a hand went up in the audience. It was a homeowner from the back of the room. Point of order. Madam President, the man said, his voice firm. Given the evidence presented, which shows the board is acting against prior legal counsel and a formal precedent, I don't think this is something to be taken under advisement. This is something that needs to be voted on. Right now. Another hand went up. Then another. The public forum had turned. The facts were out. And the neighbors were no longer willing to be silent spectators. The climax was over. But the fallout was just beginning. The meticulously controlled structure of Karen's meeting shattered. The motion from the floor, seconded by 3 people at once, could not be ignored. A motion has been made to vote on the dismissal of the violation against 1422 Arbor Lane, Karen said, her voice tight and strained. Sylvia, the retired teacher, found her voice for the first time that night. "I vote to dismiss the violation," she said clearly, looking at Tim with an expression of respect. Martin, the accountant, wiped his brow with a handkerchief. "Given the precedent presented in the minutes, I also vote to dismiss." 2-1. Karen didn't even bother to cast her losing vote. "The motion passes," she bit out. "The violation is dismissed, and all fines are rescinded." A scattered, spontaneous applause broke out in the room. It was a small sound, but in the sterile, beige chamber, it sounded like a revolution. But the homeowner who made the first motion wasn't finished. He stood up again. A second motion. He called out, in light of the evidence suggesting the board president knowingly acted against legal counsel and concealed a prior board ruling from both the members and her fellow directors, I move for an immediate, independent audit of all fines levied and legal expenditures approved by the president in the last 12 months. The motion was seconded almost before he finished speaking. The dam of polite silence had broken, and years of pent-up frustration with Karen's reign were flooding the room. The motion passed with a loud chorus of ayes. Karen could only sit there. Her authority evaporated, as the community she had ruled with an iron fist voted to investigate her. The meeting descended into a controlled chaos of questions and demands for transparency. Tim and Deborah quietly packed their projector and laptop. Their work was done. As they left, several neighbors stopped them, shaking Tim's hand, patting him on the back. "Thank you," one woman whispered. "You have no idea how long we've needed someone to do that." In the weeks that followed, the resolution of their conflict rippled through the community. The independent audit revealed a pattern of questionable fines and disproportionate legal spending on minor issues, many of which seemed to benefit Karen's personal sense of order. Faced with the findings and a petition for her removal signed by over half the homeowners, Karen Spruce resigned from the HOA board. The management company, Prestige, seeing the writing on the wall, quietly terminated their contract with the association. A new interim board was appointed, with a humbled and slightly terrified Tommy at the helm. Their first act was to pass a transparency resolution, requiring all board decisions and legal opinions to be published in a monthly newsletter. The era of secret interpretations and hidden precedents was over. One crisp autumn evening, about 2 months after the hearing, Deborah was scrolling through a local real estate website. Well, she said, turning her laptop toward Tim. "Look what I found." On the screen was a real estate listing. It was Karen Spruce's house, 2 doors down. It had been put on the market the week after she resigned. The description was full of glowing adjectives. But one phrase stood out to Deborah. It was in the section describing the home office. A perfect space for the discerning professional, featuring a large picture window with an unobstructed, panoramic view of the community greenbelt. Tim read the words, and the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place with a satisfying thud. "Her home office," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. He pictured Karen, a high-end consultant or real estate agent herself, sitting at her desk, trying to close a deal or impress a client, and seeing his truck, his honest, reliable, gloss black, slightly chipped Ford F-150, parked right in the middle of her panoramic view. It had never been about aesthetic harmony or property values for the entire community. It had been about her property value, about a clear line of sight from her window. She was planning to sell, and she believed that removing the eyesore of his working-class truck would add thousands of dollars to her asking price. Her entire campaign of harassment, the misuse of her power, the lies, the financial threats, it was all rooted in simple, unadulterated greed. He looked out the window at Betty, parked in her usual spot, She looked magnificent in the twilight, a quiet monument to resilience. He and Deborah had been dragged into a fight they never wanted. But by sticking to the facts, by trusting in the process, and by choosing the high road, they had not only defended their home, but had also helped their community reclaim itself from the petty tyranny of one person's selfish agenda. The quiet of the evening felt different now. It wasn't just the absence of conflict. It was the presence of a hard-won peace.